I'm still reflecting on Nigel's question on whether I could explain this to my mother, and she's an NHS manager, and I think the answer's no. So we also started the day by promising you that we would sort of defrag and demystify all the NHS changes, and Nigel's just summed up the day by saying we're not really sure what's going on, so don't worry about it. So I'm not sure how much progress we've made in 8 hours here, but look, this is your chance. We will have a hard finish at 4:30, but this is your chance to fire any questions you like. We're a smaller group now, so don't be shy. Who's going to kick us off with the first question? Have we got mics in? We have. Here we go.
Peter Murray, I'm from Wellards. We've talked 2 or 3 times today about the new structure compared with the old structure. I'm wondering, with regional health authorities and PCDs and so on, there was a fair amount of independence. Now we've got the massive NHS commissioning board replacing all that with the national level, regional level, local level. How much freedom is someone in a local area team going to have to make a decision rapidly that's needed locally? Or is it just going to go up the system and down the system and come back out with the wrong answer?
There's this idea of creating a single operating model, and I think part of the purpose of that is to be able to get reasonably uniform decisions which fit within a sort of standard framework, which mean you don't have to push everything up. Because I think the NHS has experience that if you push everything up, you do get you wait a long time, and B, you often get a slightly perverse answer. But there is a really interesting difference between a regional office or a local area team and an authority. So, just for example, if someone decides that they want to take away a large chunk of London's research funding, it's quite legitimate for Ruth Carnell, as chief executive of an authority, to actually not necessarily support that, and to actually marshal arguments that argue. It's very different if you are a bureaucrat in a hierarchy. You can't do that. You can't be that subversive because you have no legitimacy. So so this raises an interesting question about how much freedom the CCGs have, and that's where the health and wellbeing boards and the role of the practices as membership. The CCGs are a membership body with members. So there's at least 3 or 4 different competing sources of legitimacy. GP see 80% of their patients every year. They've got clinical expertise. Local authorities have an elected base. Versus the National Commissioning Board, which has got a mandate, which I didn't mention, but is a kind of an instruction about what's to be delivered, and how that plays out. I think I wouldn't like to predict, but I normally bet on hierarchy.
I think there's some, as I suggested in my presentation, I think there is scope for local priorities. I think for unapproved local difference, I think might be more challenging.
Another question. Yep.
One for Andrew, really. We hear, we know in Northern Ireland we've got joint budgets. We know there's been some successful pilots down on the south coast. Within the new system, is there much scope for that happening more? Because it would seem with the social problems we're going to be getting with social care, we already have with social care, you're going to want to bring all this together. In the new arrangements, how possible is that to truly present an integrated service?
It's receiving a great deal of attention. I think I wouldn't take too much comfort from Northern Ireland, because I think it's kind of quite a sort of public without much sort of diversity and innovation. I may be being very unfair to Northern Ireland, but there's a huge amount of enthusiasm, because providing that there is a sort of shared recognition of what the issues are that need addressing, and we're doing some work together actually. But there are other parts of the country where I've also been talking to people about this, which is really about a lot of this flows from where is the greatest spend across the system, where it is likely that is where there's the greatest scope for improvement. And if you can get a more flexible approach to this, with all sorts of levers, including personal health budgets. And certainly social care budgets, and introducing principles of designing around the patient rather than sort of blocks of service, and thinking about how the tariffs are used differently. I'm quite enthusiastic about it. The local government association's line on this is that we strongly support integration around the individual and the carer, which is a fairly sort of flexible. We think it would be a considerable waste of time to impose organisational structures. And some of the examples that are widely quoted, for example, Torbay, are vertical integration within a foundation trust model, essentially, which doesn't have regard to the benefits that come from thinking about the other aspects of services councils provide, housing support, sort of other preventative services, children's services, related activities, that kind. So I think there is a possibility. One of the worries that I think I said this in my speech is that if the assumption is competence to try things out because you're okay and you've got the best interest of the place and your patients in mind, then I think it's quite possible. If the assumption is proved competence or assumed incompetence, then
You just end up replicating additional size. We didn't talk about personal budgets in health. Policymakers have been pushing this for some years now. The uptake is not great, and I think it turns out, particularly for sort of frail older people with cognitive impairment, it's quite hard to make it work. I suppose if you were politically cynical, what you'd say is if you could get a shared budget for elements of long-term care, you have an opportunity to move some elements of health out of the health package into the social care package. And what's the advantage of that? Well, one has a copay and the other doesn't. But I have heard politicians kind of in the Conservative Party speculating on, for nursing home care, for example, you might be able to shift. It doesn't really, like all things based on copay, it doesn't really solve your problem. It just moves it somewhere else. But I do wonder whether that's one of the reasons why there's been some resistance to personal budgets in health, because it basically puts you in a slightly interesting question about are you effectively forcing people to top up inadequate budgets? It's be interesting.
Yeah. And most of the integration models fudge the charging issue by having an extended period in which care is free, irrespective of whether it's health or social care. But you're right, that is a potential challenge.
Can I just ask, most of the folks in this room, I think, probably have a role which is about engaging with stakeholders, decision makers. How many of you are already engaging with local government?
About as many as knew about it.
Yeah. How many are going to have a plan to engage with local government after this?
Good.
A few people thinking.
My
good.
mission is complete.
Yeah. So the question up at the back.
Yeah, Mike Brannigan-Harris, Device Access. I've got a question really. I was interested to hear in Nigel's talk about the fact that NICE are going to introduce this implementation consortium. I think it was called the NIC that mentioned a year ago in the Innovation Health and Wealth Report, and we're now a year on and there still isn't one. So what that basically means is all the work that we as industry do in the medtech and pharmaceutical world in getting devices through the HTAs and getting positive appraisal doesn't sort of necessarily mean, even when they say you're going to offer the treatment's going to be offered has mandatory funding, actually it doesn't mean anything because they don't have to if the hospitals don't want to do the procedures, and the this collaborative still doesn't exist. Do you have any insight as to when that might exist? Because to me, it just seems there's a big link missing in terms of the work the industry does in bringing innovation to market and the work that NICE does in taking products through appraisal processes and then finding that it falls on deaf ears, that things don't get adopted when they're asked to be adopted.
I don't know. There's still talk of doing this. I'm not anticipating that policy isn't going to be implemented. I honestly don't know what's happened to it. But I mean, I think the point I was making earlier, which is the kind of sort of lack of connection that's been made here is just because NICE says this is cost effective doesn't make it a rational investment decision, right? If it's still £30,000 a quali, or 18,657 or whatever your university now say it ought to be, there's still an awful lot of things being bought which are much, much cheaper per quali, right? And it does not make sense to take money out of, I don't know, hip replacement and put it in to, you know, some huge molecule, you know, some huge monoclonal antibody molecule that has, you know, £30,000 of quality adjusted life year cost if what you're buying is £4,000. So I can buy much more health gain. So I think there's point one. Point two is it's not the problem of an individual clinician to stimulate UK PLC's innovation. So there's a sort of kind of misalignment of sort of think it's still part of a top-down. If you look who chaired the Health and Wealth Committee, it's still a bit of a top-down, we see it this way, there everyone else should see it our way. And there's a kind of failure to understand how individual clinicians and individual commissioners need to make complex trade-off decisions. And simply saying to them, well, we think this is 30,000, this has come in at 28,500, therefore it's a good investment. No, it's not. At the margin, it may be a very poor investment. So I think tackling some of the ways these decisions are made. There's then, of course, a whole set of things that this misses about the way that, you know, that people have put huge amounts of machinery in to stop innovation. But Chris, you're more of an expert on this than me, so I should shut up, really.
Well, I mean, I think there's a kind of policy point, and then there's a kind of quantitative point. I mean, the policy point is that NICE directives are in complete tension with the idea of devolving decisions on clinical care locally. So, you know, that is just going to continue to be there, and enforcing it is just going to create confrontations. So a number of meetings I've been to recently, many in other countries actually, where, you know, the leads of old PCTs stand up in public and say, get NICE off our backs, it's telling us to do things we can't afford, blah, blah, blah. The nice argument back to that is you guys aren't looking hard enough for savings. You know, you're shroud waving. You're finding something spectacularly good value to pull the money out of, so you can blame me,
Both of these could be true.
rather than tackling the real inefficiencies in the system, which would have allowed you to, you know, where that £28,000 per quality would have been good value. So that argument will continue basically, because what we're looking at here is a basic tension about how clinical decision-making runs in the NHS, and what's coming from NICE is counter to the whole spirit of these reforms, and that is just going to carry on being a tension, I think. You know.
I think what's really interesting is, as I look into the future and seeing what's happened recently with things like Avastin and off-label drugs, it's become very scary in terms of local decisions being made on you know, where guidance and research has been done, and then people can look at using off-license drugs. I mean, if I was in the pharmaceutical industry, and I'm not, but I'd find that a very worrying future. But the other thing, that there is a huge disconnect between NICE approval of any technology, or even NICE guidance on new technologies, and then a disconnect between the tariff. That they don't talk to each other. It's like Audi building cars and them finishing them, and then nobody having the price list for them. And there is some huge chains missing in the whole of that part of the environment, that if we as industry could get together and push. I met with NICE last week, and I bring this up all the time, that there are big, you know, important chains missing in the whole of the process, where industry do their best and spend millions of pounds on research, and there's gaps where tariffs don't meet, you know, the new devices that come out, and it takes years for companies then be able to take the products forward. And anyway, thanks for your views.
So it's National Commissioning Board and Monitor now, not just NICE, that you need to talk to about the pricing issue. There's more people to talk to.
Yeah.
Somewhere in the depths of Quarry House, there is someone who rarely sees daylight who knows the answer to that.
But it's all about access as well. I mean, for industry, it's difficult for us to access these people. In the pharmaceutical world, I think there's been generally good access to commissioners. It's where decisions are made. But for the devices world, it's been commissioners are, well, who are they? And we need to learn this new environment now. But thank you.
But I mean, that does raise an interesting point, which is true around the world in my experience of working with folk in device companies, which is, you know, who is your purchaser? And for a large number of devices, you know, the purchaser is the acute provider.
Absolutely.
And it's their job to juggle all these costs. In some of the pharmaceuticals, the purchaser is the commissioning group, and then it's their job to juggle the. So it's a complicated world, and it's not just the UK. I mean, it is complicated, because you can't micromanage an entire system from the top, as we've discovered in the UK, although we don't admit.
We still try, yeah. And you can't
But
do it through pricing.
you've got to have some things done at different levels, and so unfortunately, it is just a fact of the world that depending on the nature of the thing you're trying to sell, you're going to have to talk to different people, and the people who are having to make the compromises and the trade-offs will be different according to the nature of the product you're trying to sell. I mean, that is true everywhere in the world. It varies about where it sits, as it were, but I don't think it's possible to imagine a health system run where you would have one person you could go and talk to who made those decisions rationally and was responsible for all the trade-offs. It would be an unimaginably complicated way of running a system, sadly.
I think the point related to that as well is how you present the proposition as well. And I guess I wanted to pick up on Chris's presentation earlier about managed entry. And I think you were talking very much at a high level, at a national level there. But clearly, there's a role for managed entry at a lower level as well. Yeah. And the language which is coming out of the DH at the moment is very much about gain sharing and partnerships. And it's how you can use sort of managed entry approaches to find the right outcome measures, find the right incentive mechanisms to work with those providers and those commissioning groups, and you share the gain. You know, you've got to leave something on the table. You can't walk away with all the benefit yourselves as manufacturers. You've got to share the gain with the providers and with the commissioners. And I think there's a lot to take away from your managed entry examples that you gave earlier.
And also I think that there's one of the challenges in the UK system, I think, is that because of the way NICE has operated, this is not a comment against NICE, and I have a lot of respect for, but because of the way NICE has operated in the last 10 years and the job it's been given, NICE has effectively consumed a very large proportion of the analytic capacity in the UK. So the people who are left to make these trade-off decisions are actually kind of left with very little but the seat of their pants to make them on, because virtually every health economist in the country is working for NICE. So, you know, if you're a PCT or a clinical commissioning group or whatever, it's going to be very, you know, so long as that system works that way, the analytic capacity is, in my view, and some others, misaligned with the decision-making burden. So, you know, in the current world, as it's sketched out here, 95% of the decision, no, it's not true because of the commissioning board, but, you know, at least 50% of the decisions in healthcare are being made by a group of people who have very little access to analytic capacity. So, you know, what do you do in those situations? You make judgments on the seat of your pants and you resort to things like, you know, looking at cost rather than value. So I think there's some really interesting arguments about if all that happened, where would you actually want your HTA in the broadest sense capacity? And the answer is it wouldn't all be at NICE.
The other solution, of course, Chris, is we have more health economists. So on that note, I'm going to draw the panel discussion to a close. Really great, fantastic presentations this afternoon, lots of interaction. So thank you all. Just join me again in thanking the panel this afternoon. I shall hand over to Alan to close.
Okay, yes, we promised we would finish on time, and we've got a couple of minutes to do that. This is your last chance to fill out your evaluation form. I've been very kind of you on you today and not mentioned it too often, but we do find of value. We hope you found the whole day of value, and as we've kind of said repeatedly through the day, value is the hot buzzword from now till April 1st next year going forward. You've got 6 months to sort this out. So we wish you much good luck. Thank you for coming, thank you for staying, and we wish you a safe journey home. Thank you very much.